Greetings, honorable and dear fellow Earthlings. The title of my video today is How Can the Masses Use the Fifth Power to Make Themselves Happier? For a long time, human society has been faced with two major problems that have often had disastrous consequences for all the people of the planet and that seem impossible to solve. My research shows that the basic conditions for solving these two dilemmas are already in place. In this paper, I will describe what are these two major problems, what are the solutions, how can they be solved? Era 1. Today, humanity is faced with two major problems with often catastrophic consequences for all the people of the planet, which seem to be impossible to solve. The first major problem is that highly centralized or autocratic dictatorship political systems not only often cause disaster to the people of their own countries, but also bring trouble to other countries in the world. And more seriously, their existence makes it impossible for mankind to create a global contractual rule of law authority based on the democracy, so that mankind will not be able to come out of barbarism. However, it seems that no one can do anything about the reality of the existence of authoritarian and dictatorial political systems, not only the people of authoritarian and dictatorial countries, but also other democratic countries in the world, including the United States of America, the sole global superpower. The second major dilemma for humankind is the fact that today's violent and brutal global order of humankind, which often leads to mutual victimization and may even lead to the common destruction of humankind, benefits no one, but all nations feel powerless to change it. In my video, Deadly Mistakes of China and the US and Conflict Resolution, I argue that according to the existing theories of state of nature, social contract, separation of powers and checks and balances, any society that fails to create the rule of law and democratic authority by means of a social contract will either fall into endless conflict and war or be under authoritarian dictatorship. Numerous facts and rational analyses have shown that it is impossible for any country to conquer the globe by force of arms in order to establish a dictatorial authority. The only way for humankind to minimize the current widespread, recurrent and massive violent conflicts is to find a possible way to create a global contractual rule of law authority by means of a race. However, judging from the mechanism of the permanent members of the United Nations Security Council, as long as one of the 5 permanent members opposes it, any proposal put forward by any country will be vetoed, and there is no hope at all for mankind to create the authority of the rule of law in the Global Compact. 2. What is the fifth power? 1. The fifth power of mankind. Internet users using smartphones or computers, plus social issues, plus AI such as ChatGPT, plus scientific bragging contest. The social issues in the above formula include major social issues, major cognitive issues. For the meaning and use of scientific bragging contest, see my second video. The fifth power is the majority consensuses on the answers or solutions to a given problem, generated through contest, which creates a tremendous power to change society. Because the majority of a nation and of humanity as a whole is a huge number, once a majority consensus is formed on something, it creates a powerful social opinion. For example, the reason why authoritarian dictatorships, with all their ideological absurdities, are still able to exist in the 21st century is that they take advantage of the chaotic situation in which human society does not have a majority consensus on all important issues. If the countries of the world and humankind as a whole had developed a majority consensus on the basic issues of authoritarian dictatorships and democratic politics, authoritarian dictatorships would not be able to continue to survive. For more clarification on this point, please see point 03 below. So far, mankind has had 5 major public powers, which are the legislative power, the executive power, the judicial power, the knowing truth power, freedom of the press, and the correcting mistakes power, to supervise and correct whether or not public policies are rationally maximized. Before there was a fifth power, the people were the greatest victims of the ignorance and wrong policies of the national leaders, the innocent victims, the forced cannon fodder, the fleeing refugees, the lambs and ants to be slaughtered at the whim of the political power. With the fifth power, the common people, who are spatially and psychologically dispersed, can, through the internet and the rules and framework of the scientific bragging contest, bring together their thoughts and intelligence to form a majority consensus on any national and global issue, generating an enormous force that cannot be ignored in order to effectively supervise and rectify the ignorance and mistakes of the country's leaders. 2. In order to effectively exercise the public's power to monitor and correct national decisions, mankind should probably establish a rule. For example, if someone put forward that China and the United States are committing fatal mistakes against all the people of the earth, If the number of people who support a global public debate competition on this issue reaches a certain order of magnitude, e.g. 100 million, world public opinion can demand that China and the United States must publicly answer, debate, and compete on this issue. How to use the fifth power to break down authoritarian dictatorships? It must be recognized that those in power in highly centralized systems don't really think that authoritarian dictatorships are the best in the world, and that they often fear that democracy will lead to social chaos and national division, so they have to implement such a system. If humanity reaches a self-consistency majority consensus on some basic questions about authoritarian dictatorships and democratic reforms, the vast majority of those in power in a highly centralized system are likely to, or are obliged to, adopt the idea of a majority consensus. The pros and cons of a highly centralized system and a democratic system based on the rule of law, as well as the question of how to carry out democratic reforms steadily in a highly centralized system, should be put forward for open discussion, debate, and competition for a majority consensus. For example, the following majority consensus may be obtained through the competition. 1. A highly centralized system is a barbaric political system that cannot be reasoned with on important national issues. 2. The greatest disadvantage of a highly centralized system is that it is impossible to prevent one and a few in power from formulating national policy through ignorance, prejudice, error, or stupidity. 3. A highly centralized system is a political system in which both the people and those in power end up as victims of man-made misfortunes. 4. A democratic system, though imperfect now. But at least without these fatal flaws that authoritarian systems cannot overcome on their own, if all members of society are mobilized to identify the problems of democratic institutions, and finding solutions to upgrade the existing version of democracy so that the reform and maintenance of national democracy also becomes a science like management, will lead to successful democratic reforms and democracies in the few countries that still have highly centralized systems. If mankind is able to obtain the above majority consensus, can the highly centralized systems continue to exist in the long term? 04. How to use the fifth power to break the barbaric global order. Then 1. In my video, Deadly Mistakes of China and the United States and Conflict Resolution, I argued that the universal weakness of human nature is that when one is in a position of weakness, they desperately seek equality and regards equality as a universal value. Once they become strong, they emphasizes their special situation and stops talking about equality. The biggest mistake in this approach is that the strong think that they can stand for equality and justice, and this will maximize their own interests. The problem now is that it is possible for mankind to create a global contractual rule of law authority if the only superpower, the United States, so desires. In order for the United States to proactively support the creation of a global contractual rule of law authority, it must be convinced by the vast majority of Americans that it is more beneficial to the United States to do so. Therefore, it will be necessary to engage in a global public debate contest on the following question: would the creation of a global contractual rule of law authority do more good or more harm to all Americans? If, at the end of the day, a majority consensus emerges that more good, there will be hope for humanity in creating a global contractual rule of law authority. 2. All relevant issues for the creation of a global contractual rule of law authority must be brought to the table, competed for majority consensus, and then acted upon together. See my 14th video, Is it necessary and possible for humanity to create a global contractual rule of law authority? And the 4 questions posed. 3. It is important to put aside the mechanism of permanent membership of the United Nations Security Council and suggest that any country, any international organization, any company, institution, or organization can hold a series of debates and competitions on the internet on the question of, is it necessary and possible for mankind to create a global contractual rule of law authority? And once there is a majority consensus on the question, the majority consensus could be improved and progressed through trial and error. Thank you all.